Uh, Welcome to the Los Angeles Public Library's Your Author program featuring award-winning author Brandy Colbert. We want to thank the Library Foundation of Los Angeles and the Lenore S. and Bernard A. Fund for their generous support. I'm Amanda Charles, a librarian for young adults in Central Library's Teenscape department.
And I'm Lynn Nguyen. I'm the young adult librarian at Chinatown Branch Library. It is our pleasure to host the Your Author series today, and we hope that you will enjoy this program. Please feel free to use the chat box to communicate your thoughts, comments, and questions at any time. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Brandy Colbert. Brandy Colbert is the award-winning author of several books for children and teens, including The Only Black Girls in Town, The Revolution of Bertie Randolph, and of course, Stonewall Book Award winner Little and Lion, and the forthcoming The Voting Booth. She is co-writer of Misty Copeland's Life in Motion Young Readers Edition, and her short fiction and essays have been published in a variety of critically acclaimed anthologies for young people. Her books have been chosen as junior library guild sections, and have appeared on many best of lists, including the American Library Association's Best Fiction for Young Adults and Quick Picks for Reluctant Young Readers. She is on faculty at Hamline University's MFA program in writing for children and lives in Los Angeles. So I would like to kick off the first question for Brandy here. When was the pivotal moment in your life when you realized that you were destined to be a writer?
Oh, I love this question. And thank you so much for having me. I'm super happy to be here. I was pretty young. I was about 7 years old. I think it was second or third grade. I think it was third grade, actually. And we had like a young authors program that my school put on every year in conjunction with one of the local colleges, which strangely I ended up going to and got my degree from there. But so they gave out prizes and had like medals and ribbons and everything. And I won first place. And I thought, oh my gosh, well, maybe this is like something other people want to read. Like maybe I should keep writing. And it was for a book called The Talking Teddy Bear, which is pretty self-explanatory. And yeah, after that, I just started kind of writing at home. And then you would see, I would still do that young authors program every year. And then you would see in my bio in the back, I would say I wanted to be an author. And so I just kind of never let go of that dream. And here I am.
I love it. That's so great.
So I wanted to ask you about the novel that you're going to talk about today. I love Alberta, who is the narrator of The Only Black Girls in Town. I love her love of surfing and the ocean, her lifelong vegetarianism, and her dedication to butter pecan ice cream. I don't surf, I'm not a vegetarian, and I really hate butter pecan ice cream, but you make Alberta feel like a person that I really want to know. How do you find your characters? How do you decide on all the details that make them feel so real and relatable, even when their experiences may be significantly different from those of the reader who is following their story?
Yeah, well, thank you. I don't surf either. I feel like that's always a little disappointing when I'm like, I wrote about a surfer, but I am a vegetarian and a Black girl like Alberta. So yeah, I think it's sort of a mix of, I get a question a lot where people ask, how much of you is in the book, or is any of this based on your life? So there is a little bit from my life. I wasn't the only Black girl in my town, but I grew up in the Ozarks in Springfield, Missouri. And so it was, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, I would say it was about 3% Black, and really has not improved much since then, but it's slowly growing. So I really wanted to write about that experience of being the only one and really not kind of having anyone to talk to about it until you do. But I think mainly it's sort of that saying you hear where people say like, the more specific you get, like the more universal it is. And I've been really shocked and so pleased with how many people say that they like really relate to Alberta or Edie or other characters in the book because they were so specific in my mind. But I think just putting those fine point on their characters and those details really draw people in, and then they're able to sort of relate back to them and sort of find a way into those characters.
Thanks.
Thank you. Can you tell us more about The Only Black Girls in Town and perhaps read a passage from your book?
Absolutely. So this is my book, The Only Black Girls in Town. Just came out March 10th, and it's my first middle grade novel. So I've written 4 young adult novels that came out before this. I was so excited to write for younger kids because, as I said, I was a child writer and also a huge reader before I was a writer. So all of my days were, spent libraries, bookstores, all of that. This book came about because of how I grew up. I usually start with character first, and then I get into the story. I'm not a writer who outlines, so I don't typically talk about my process because it's very esoteric. But with this one, I had the idea first. And so I thought, what if you were kind of like the only Black girl in a really small town, and then another one your age moved in across the street? And I was like, oh, that's a story. So this book centers on Alberta, who was that girl. And then at the beginning of the novel, her father tells her that new neighbors bought the bed and breakfast that was for sale across the street from them in their small town of Ewing Beach, which is on the central coast of California. So it's a fictional town. In my mind, it's like 20 minutes south of San Luis Obispo. And so this new family moves in, and it's a single mom and her daughter who are from New York, and they're Black. And so Alberta is so excited about this. It turns out the new girl, Edie, they don't have that much in common, but they sort of start to bond when they find these journals in the attic of the bed and breakfast where Edie and her mom live. And these journals are written, they're from the 1950s and 1960s, and it's a huge box full of them. And so it's someone who kept really detailed journals. It's a woman, and I don't want to spoil too much, but they sort of set off on this mystery to figure out who wrote the journals. And they kind of, they become closer through that, but they're also going through typical middle school issues like friendships and bullying and all kinds of things. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of that. And then I will read just a little bit for you from that. Okay. So I'm not starting from the very beginning, but it's close enough that I don't think you need that much explanation. I only have a few more days to sleep in until school starts, but I get up early the next morning to have breakfast with my dads. Today is the day we're meeting the new neighbors. Dad doesn't go into the art gallery until later, usually not until it's been open at least a couple of hours. He has people to take care of things, so sometimes he doesn't show up until after lunch. But he always gets up early to have breakfast with my other dad, Elliot, before Elliot drives to San Luis Obispo for work. It's about 20 minutes up the Central Coast from Ewing Beach. Well, you're up early, Dad says, running a hand over the top of my dreadlocks. I've already poured a bowl of cereal and almond milk. Elliot is making coffee in the French press, wearing his professor clothes, a dark button-down shirt, dress shoes, and khaki pants. I couldn't believe it when I first saw pictures of him and Dad from the art commune they used to live on. There's one of Elliot standing in a field wearing a pair of bright red overalls with a black plastic rose in the front pocket. Don't you think we should go meet the neighbors this morning? They might be busy in the afternoon, I say, shoveling a spoonful of Cheerios into my mouth. Dad peers at the banana bread we made last night. We wrapped it up in plastic after it cooled. This sure would be good with a cup of coffee, he says. Dad, I kid, Alberta, but we'll wrap it up nice for them before we take it over. Make it look like more of a gift. I don't know how he's planning to do that, but Dad is good at making things look fancy and nice, so I just nod. Elliot sits down with a plate of avocado toast. You two seem awfully invested in these new neighbors. Do you know something about them that I don't? Are they superheroes? A family of mind readers? They're Black, I say. And I think that should be enough of an explanation, but Elliot still looks confused. Just because they're Black doesn't mean they're going to be our new best friends, he says slowly. We don't know anything about them. But I don't want to have another weird conversation about being Black. Not that it would be the same as when I was talking to my best friend Laramie, but sometimes Elliot and Dad disagree when they talk about race. I always feel like I have to choose sides, even though I thought we were all on the same team. Go on, Al, Elliot encourages. Well, when we go to parties and bonfires, you and Dad always go up to the Black people first. Sometimes you spend almost the whole night talking to them. Or if you see Black people you don't even know when we're downtown, you nod at them. Like you're already friends. Isn't this sort of like that? Huh. Elliot drinks his coffee. I see what you mean, but I don't want you putting expectations on people. We might have more in common with, say, the McKees than the new neighbors. I make a face into my Cheerios. Bad example. We have absolutely nothing in common with the McKees, and Elliot knows it. Dad comes up behind him and slides a hand onto his shoulder. I think what your dear father is trying to say is that all our skinfolk ain't kinfolk. What? Elliot's hand reaches up to meet Dad's and squeezes. Yes, exactly. Just because we're Black and the new neighbors are Black doesn't mean we have the same values or interests. But Dad adds, it's always a good idea to reach out to your skinfolk, especially when they're new in the community, and especially when there are barely any of us here in the first place. Elliot frowns a little. Well, there are more of us now than there ever have been. It could always be worse. All of us combined are less than 0.5% of the population, Dad says, looking at him. We can still count the number of families on 2 hands. Yes, it could be worse, but not much. Dad and Elliot don't look angry when they argue. They never raise their voices, at least not around me, but they don't hide that they're disagreeing. Nothing wrong with a little healthy discourse, Elliot always says, and Dad always says that just means he likes to argue. But he usually smiles or hugs him or kisses him by his ear when he says that, and Elliot always smiles and hugs and kisses him back. Okay. Elliot holds up his hands like he's been defeated. I expect a full report on our new best friends at dinner tonight. I know Elliot doesn't want me to get too excited, but I hope the new neighbors are kinfolk.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was great. That's one of my favorite scenes.
Oh, good.
Now we'd like to take questions from people at home who are watching.
Yeah.
So it looks like we have one already. Did the author have a similar conversation like this with her family when she was young?
Oh, that is a great idea. I can't quite remember if I had an exact conversation like that. My parents, they grew up really quite different from me. They grew up with really big families. People are always shocked when I tell them this, but my mom has 12 brothers and sisters, and my dad has 9 brothers and sisters. So I literally have 60 plus first cousins and 21 aunts and uncles, just blood related alone. And they grew up in, majority Black communities in Arkansas. And so when they moved us to Springfield, or I was born in Springfield, my brother and I were, but it was quite different from how they grew up. So I think they were sort of trying to juggle a lot of raising us how they were raised with the same types of values, but also realizing that we were living in a very different community than they were. But one thing they did always teach us was that, we are a community. Black people are your broader family, even if you're not technically related. And that, the scene where, or the part where she talks about you guys always go up and say hi to the Black people first. That's definitely something that I learned from a young age. If you see another Black person, especially in this town, you always say hello because there's not that many of us. And so we want to keep that good rapport and that sense of community going. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
So it looks like we are still waiting on a few other questions. We do have some prepared. I wanted to ask you about a moment in The Only Black Girl in Town, which I just love. There's this moment where Alberta and Edie are just getting to know each other. And Alberta tells Edie about Nicolette's microaggressions, though she doesn't use that word to describe them. Edie just believes Alberta without questioning her or telling her that she must have misunderstood. And that is such a great moment, such a great testament to the power and necessity of Black female friendship. What advice do you have for young people who don't have that, who, like Alberta at the beginning of the book, are the only Black kids in their class or their school or their town?
Yeah, that was kind of me. It wasn't completely me because we did go to an all Black church. So, outside of my family, though, Sundays were the days I knew. And then if we went to something else at church during the week, I was like, okay, those are the days I'm going to see Black people. But it also wasn't really a time when I would feel let's talk about all the terrible things that have happened to us. And also just, I think at that age, I wasn't necessarily always aware that it was okay to call out things like that, or in that scene to call something racist when it was, or, the more nuanced term for things that are a lot of those things that happen in my book, or microaggression, like you said. That's why it's so important for me to put scenes like that into my books. I really, really want kids this age to have that language and to know that it's okay to call out things. It's tough at that age because you really just want to be liked, and you just really you don't want conflict with your friends. And, but I think it's really important to speak up for yourself and to let people know when they say things that make you uncomfortable and that are racist or prejudiced or whatever they may be, that call it out and let them know that it's not okay. Because, a lot of times if you don't or if you laugh it off thinking that it'll just go away, it doesn't. And then sometimes it can grow worse. Or if people think that you're okay with that kind of treatment, they will continue it. So yeah, that's my biggest advice, is just to speak up when you hear injustice, and not just when it's against you. Speak up if you hear someone saying something bad about another group or anything that you feel is wrong. It never hurts to speak up. It might not be met with, the greatest understanding, or anyone who wants to really change how they're thinking or what they're saying. But I think it's really important to just stand up for yourself and speak up whenever you can.
Thank you. It looks like we have some questions from people watching. Lynn, did you want to take one of these?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll take the next one. Maria here asked, what advice would you give to a young adult that wants to become an author? Where do they start?
Just start writing, write down anything you can. I will say, like, I'm getting ready to start working on like my 8th book, and I can't believe that, but I was a really prolific kid writer, and I go back and I read the things. I have just like a Rubbermaid tote full of like old spiral notebooks that I used to write in, and it wasn't great. But like, you have to start somewhere. And even now when I start writing something, it's not great. Like, writers usually give, probably the most useful advice would just be to be okay with like kind of crappy first draft, if I could say that, because nothing's going to be perfect at first. And also just like give yourself room to play. Just let the story kind of come out. Try not to edit yourself as you go along. Just write down what's in your head and get it down. And then you can always go back and fix it later. And on that note, don't compare yourself ever to books that are on your bookshelves, because I got to tell you, like, those books have been through rounds and rounds of editing. They've been through lots of reads from, critique partners, from editors, copy editors, line editors, agents, literary agents. It's so many eyes have been on the books that are on your shelf. So just kind of let the story guide you. I'm not an outliner, so don't think that you have to have the whole story worked out ahead of time. So yeah, that's all just going back to just let the story out. Just sit down, get that time in front of your computer or in front of your paper or your journal or whatever, and just write it out.
That's amazing advice. I really, really enjoyed listening to you tell us that. Should we ask another question, Amanda, from our audience? Or
so I can read the next one on the list from Diane. Okay, so and this one I'm super excited to hear the answer to. What is Brandy's next project that she is working on?
Oh yeah, I'm excited to talk. Well, so I will kind of give you 2 answers, because one I can't talk about quite yet because it's still not announced. But I do have another book out in about 3 weeks, I think. So it's called The Voting Booth, and it's YA, so it's not middle grade, but it's a young adult novel. It's it is so many things I had never tried before. It's a book. I'll tell you what it's about first. It's about 2 Black first-time voters. So they're both 18 and they're getting to vote in the next presidential election for the first time, which of course we have one of those coming up. And it's centered on 2 teens. So one is Marva and then the other one is named Duke. And so Marva is the first in line to vote. She has been wanting to vote her entire life. She's just been really active, getting people registered, canvassing, all of this stuff ahead of the presidential election. And so she votes and she's so happy and she's getting ready to go to school. And then she looks back and sees that this Black guy that's in line behind her, he's up there and he can't vote. And so she sees him turned away and she's like, well, wait a minute, what's going on? And so she kind of just like inserts herself because she's like, I'm going to make sure this guy can vote. And so she kind of, I guess not unexpectedly, but he didn't ask for her to kind of take on this mission, but she just takes it on anyway. And they set off on this full day, and the book is set in about 12 hours, so a full day. And they skip school to try to get this voting thing going, and they get to know each other and they start kind of falling for each other. But it deals with not just them trying to vote, but just talks somewhat about the history of voting in the United States and voter suppression, and just kind of all those dynamics. And then there's also kind of a more lighthearted subplot about Marva has an internet famous cat named Eartha Kitty. And Eartha, it's like one of my best character names I've ever come up with. And Eartha Kitty goes missing, so that kind of ties into the whole story. But so I would say it's like sort of like a lighthearted, kind of more romancy than any of my other YA books that have gone in that direction, but also with, you know, some serious topics woven in there too. So that will be out July 7th. And then I am also working on my next middle grade novel, which I can't tell you too much about, but it's like a loose retelling of a pretty famous story. And I am super, super excited about it. So that should hopefully be announced soon. And that'll be out next year at some point. I'm not quite sure when, but yeah, thank you.
Can't wait to find out what it is.
Wonderful. I think we have time for another question here from our audience. Lear asked, what are your favorite books that you've written and why?
Oh, I love this question. I always get this question and then I'm like, wait, why don't I have a better answer? You know, I don't have kids, but it's kind of like that thing where people are like, you can't choose your favorite child. So it always kind of feels like the one that I'm working on, but I will say that I have a very soft spot for my first novel, Point, that was published 6 years ago. And so there was kind of a long gap between my first and second novels. So way more people know me for Little and Lion than know me for Point, but Point was my baby. And, you know, I love that because it was kind of, you know, the book of my heart. So I'd been working on it for a very long time. And that's when I got my, you know, agent and my first book deal and all of that. But I will say also probably The Revolution of Birdie Randolph is very special to me too. You know, none of these are my stories. They're not like personal to me, but that one just felt really special. I don't know. Just writing about this girl who's so very like diligently working to try to find her voice. And she's just always kind of been a good girl. And again, it's not my story, but like, I kind of relate to that, kind of like being a good girl, to being like, I want to like rebel a little bit. So I like that one a lot too. And it's also set in Chicago, which I lived in Chicago briefly, but I love writing about it. I love living in LA and I love writing about living in Chicago. So I think those two are probably like my favorites for now.
Looks like we have a question relayed from an 8-year-old. How do you write from the perspective of different age groups? And what kind of research do you do? What kind of research do you do? Or do you do a lot of observing and listening?
That is a wonderful question. Thank you. So yeah, I was kind of worried because I had written only young adult novels up until my first middle grade. And I knew that I wanted to write for younger people. And I had been reading a lot of kind of modern middle grade for the first time since, you know, I was a kid, since I was that age. And I was reading it and I was seeing how other authors did it, but I was just kind of worried that I wouldn't be able to get back into that voice. But, you know, so I kind of struggled with that for a little bit. And I talked to my agent and she was like, you know, just don't try to worry about following the rules. She just said to just kind of get in there and write like you would any other book. But the activities and like the day-to-day life of the main character will sort of dictate how the book is executed. I don't know if that quite makes sense, but so once I started writing, I did feel like I was kind of getting into the head of a 12-year-old again, which was very interesting because I didn't quite remember what it was like to be 12. But then once I started writing, it did really feel like I was right back there, kind of having those same struggles and issues and thoughts and feelings that I had when I was younger. And then as for research, yeah, I'm really into research. So I have a journalism degree and I still have a few different jobs. So I'm also a copy editor, and a lot of copy editing, especially if I do a nonfiction book, I have to do a lot of fact checking. So it's been really interesting, you know, and there is a historical element to The Only Black Girls in Town in the journals that they find. And so, you know, when I was in school, I used to think that I didn't like history at all and that I didn't like research because our history books weren't great. And, you know, I think our teachers felt really sort of bound to that, especially kind of back in the 80s and 90s. They didn't feel like they were able to really go off of that curriculum. So I really thought I didn't like history, but it turns out I love it. I like learning on my own time. So there is a little bit of like things that I just kind of research on my own time. I think find it finds its way into my work. And then I do a lot of observing. I'm kind of that person, like I would never just sit down to go people watch, but like if I'm out and about, I am always watching people. I'm interested in everything about people, like their mannerisms and their voice and how they interact with each other. And even my friends and family, like, again, I don't try to put too much of my real life into it, but I'm sure there's always little bits stolen from people I know. So yeah, I think that's great advice for anyone who wants to write, is to just always pay attention to what's going on around you. You can find inspiration literally anywhere. So yeah, thank you for that question.
That's a great question. Denise here asked, how do I know when my story is ready to share?
Ooh, that's a tough one, because I have to tell you, even as someone who has several books published, one of the hardest things for me is realizing like anyone can go pick up one of my books at any time and read it. Like you don't have that control once it's out there. I think there's sometimes a rush to try to share work because you just want to get it out there and you want to like get to the next step and try to, I don't know if you're looking to get published or anything like that, but I would say make sure you take your time with it. You want it to be as good as possible before you can show people. But my advice is when there's, sometimes you work on it and then you set it aside for a little bit, maybe pick up another project, let that one kind of marinate, and then you can go back to it and see a lot of the things that you might not have seen when you were first working on it. And once you've worked on it to a point where you've set it aside, you've given it some time to sort of simmer, and there's nothing else you can do to make it better, I think that's when you can send it to people. If you have critique partners, so if you have people that you share your work with, sometimes you can pass it along to them earlier than that, but really just try to be patient and take your time with the work. And then when you just get to that point where you're like, I'm stuck, I'm done, I've done the best I can on this, then I think that's when it's ready to go to other people.
Okay, and we have not a question, but a plea from Jay Camp, who says, please write some more middle grade fiction. My upper elementary kids need you. So some definite fans there waiting for that next middle grade book.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, there's at least one more on the way, and I hope many more in the future. So thank you so much.
And then from the same poster, so many of my favorite authors have a background in journalism. Did you ever work as a journalist, and how has your study of journalism informed your writing now?
Okay, yeah, it's funny. I think I've met more journalists in my fiction writing than I have, as a journalist. Yeah, I kind of don't use the word journalist, because when I think of journalist, I think of hard-hitting investigative reporter, or somebody on the news, 20 minutes or 60 minutes. I think of all those hard-hitting shows or a busy newsroom. But, I have a journalism degree, and I have actually worked in magazines for, over 15 years now. I used to be a content editor, so I did edit articles, and work in an office and kind of do that whole, which I loved that so much. But now I transitioned to copy editing because I really love the minutia of just getting in there and just going line by line through a manuscript to make sure everything lines up and that everything is accurate. I think that, journalism, I think is integral to my writing. I didn't know you could actually go to school for creative writing when I was in high school. So I knew that I wanted to write, and I didn't know anything else I wanted to do. And I really liked my journalism classes and being on the yearbook staff. So I was like, well, I guess I'll just study journalism. My parents will be okay with that. Whereas they would not have been okay with I'm just going to go study writing. I think that journalism, kind of like I was talking about before with the observation and sort of paying attention to everything around you, I think that it has informed it in that way. I think, you learn how to sort of talk to people, how to ask questions, how to get to the root of the information that you're trying to find. So I think that's always useful in a writing career. Especially I feel there was historical stuff in my middle grade, and I'm really interested in kind of weaving together the modern and the historical. And so to me, that research just felt so natural, and just digging in there and really getting to the story. So I think it just kind of helps you be maybe a more maybe more, at least for me, it helps me be like a more focused writer and to remember like the information that I'm actually looking for and just how to get to it and get it on the page. Thank you.
That's a great question. I have one from Madeline here about your practice of writing. Do you workshop your books?
I don't. I used to have a creative, oh, hi, Maddie. I recognized her name there. Yeah, I used to have a critique group that was wonderful and I loved them. And then it just sort of, timing didn't work out and couldn't meet anymore. And then, you know, the more books I published, I sort of started to get a little shyer. Like I said, it's like so weird to me that the more I publish, the less comfortable I am with actually knowing like my writing's out there for people to see. And I have my literary agent. So for anyone who doesn't know that's watching, a literary agent is your liaison between you and the publishing house that publishes you. So they sell your work, and then every agent is different. Mine is what they call an editorial agent. So she really likes to get in there and sort of edit my work before it goes out to my editor. And so she's not my critique partner, and I would always advise anyone, don't use your agent as your critique partner. But she does sort of, we've worked together almost 10 years now, and we just have a really good system. And so she looks at my work, and occasionally, like this book, The Only Black Girls in Town, I did have a friend read it because I have, Alberta has 2 dads. And so I wanted someone who is in a same-sex marriage to make sure that that looked okay. And that, you know, the stuff around being a parent to a child in that sort of family, that sort of non-traditional family structure, that looked okay. So typically it will just be if I need someone to sort of read for representation that I don't have experience with and that I want to make sure I got really, really right. But yeah, I don't quite workshop anymore, but I would advise anyone, especially starting out, to get a group of trusted friends, or even just one trusted friend. You don't need a group. One person that you really trust that's going to read your writing. And, you know, you're not always going to get feedback that you agree with. Even, you know, once you're publishing, sometimes you push back against your editor. I usually don't have that issue, thankfully, but yeah, it kind of helps you get more comfortable with knowing what feedback to take and what's useful and what you could kind of just set aside and say, thank you for that, but that wasn't quite for me. So yeah, I would definitely recommend workshopping your work. Yeah, if you can. Thanks, Maddie.
Maddie also said, fact checking forever.
Yes.
And I don't know if she like, you know, raised her fist in the air, but I believe she did, because fact checking is awesome.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Terry, who asks, aside from Eartha Kitt, which is amazing, I share that sentiment, how do you name your characters?
Ooh, thank you for that Eartha Kitt love. I love this question and I don't get it enough. So thank you so much, Terry. I love names. I mean, I am absolutely obsessed with names. I try not to use names of people I know, which is getting harder and harder with each book. And, you know, the more people you know in your life, that gets a little difficult. Or if it is a name of anyone I know, it's very intentional. So, and oftentimes I forget I've put a name into a book, and a friend will be like, is this me? And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's your name. Yes, sorry. Didn't warn you about that. But I use some baby naming websites, which I really love. There's one I like called Nimbler. It's NYMBLER.com. And then there's other just like, you know, babynames.com or whatever. Those sites are always really good. I also really like the Social Security website. You can go in and look and see which names were popular which year. And so that's like good if you want to kind of be, you know, on trend, or just see like if you want to use a name that nobody was really using. I really like old-fashioned names. I like, I like just kind of like non-traditional, off the beaten path names. I'm trying to think. Just usually when I hear a name, it just kind of sticks with me, and I'll be like, oh, I love that name, and I'll think about it until I use it. So like for my last YA novel, The Revolution of Birdie Randolph, her name is actually Dove, and I knew I really wanted the name Birdie, but I was like, her mom wouldn't have named her Birdie, but she would have named her Dove and then called her Birdie. So it's like things like that, like kind of this math. I also use some family names too sometimes, because talking to my mom, and my brother's really into like genealogy. And so he's gone through and done, quite a bit of our family tree, and just I was like, oh my gosh, like the names in our family are amazing. So, and actually that's a great question. It reminds me that in Alberta, or in the only Black girls in town, Alberta, I named her sort of like a family name in several different ways. And then my mom, right before I was getting ready to write the dedication, she was like, you have like a great, great Aunt Alberta, right? And I was like, what? I had no idea. So that was really cool to know, and just like yet another family connection. And then I was able to like dedicate the book to like, all the people that name was inspired by, and her too. So yeah, I guess they come from all different ways, but I know some authors who just kind of, they're just like, yeah, the name's like Mary or Dawn, and that's it. And they just like don't think about it. But I obviously just gave you like a 5-minute answer, so I'm very into it. Thank you for asking.
I think that's a great question. I have a question here from Cece. She asks, what's your experience or thoughts on self-publishing?
Oh, yeah. This is a question I don't get very often. Self-publishing is great. I know a lot of people who do it and who are very successful at it. And I think that it's so hard. Like traditional publishing, there's so many gatekeepers. There's not just, you have to get an agent typically, because most big houses won't take unsolicited work. So they won't just take a query from just random Brandy Colbert. Like it has to be Brandy Colbert with an agent. And not only that, it's like they know that they're publishing books that they are going to want to sell a certain amount, or that they're going to want to hit in the library and school market. And then there are parameters within that. So you can write about this, but you can't write about that. And I don't feel stifled by that, but I know a lot of people do. Or sometimes you have a really great book, and just for some reason, timing or anything else, like people just don't connect with it. And it can be hard to find a home, if not impossible at the time, because so much of it is about the market. And then you get into like the business portion of it, where it's like your job should just be to write the book and not have to worry about the market or any of that stuff. I don't know enough about self-publishing to really speak, in an educated way on that. But I will say that I know a lot of people have good luck with it. And I also know that some people who've self-published have then gone on to have really successful careers in traditional publishing as well, which is an option too. I think with self-publishing, it's probably just important to also take the same amount of time that you would take to write and revise a book for traditional publishing. And, gosh, I don't want to tell anyone to spend a bunch of money trying to get that ready. But if you have the money and the time, try to get a professional editor to look at your work, and just, a copy editor at the very least, if you can hire one or two of those people. Or if you know anybody who would, just do it for you. But if you can hire someone to do that, I think that could be really useful. Gosh, I wish I had more resources or anything to share with you to give better advice about this. But I think that one of my big pieces of advice is to not give up. So if a dream is to be traditionally published, I would say don't turn to self-publishing just because traditional publishing seems difficult. Try to give that a shot. But if self-publishing is something that you're looking forward to, then go for it, because I think it can be really, really useful and valuable. And there are a lot of really great, talented authors who self-publish.
Thank you. So there's another question up here, which also happened to be one of the questions that we had on our previous list too, which is, I can't believe we haven't asked you this yet. What were your favorite books or authors as a young adult?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. So many. I feel like everyone always says this, but like Judy Blume was like it for me. I loved Judy Blume so much. I can't remember when I started reading her. Probably, it might have been the Fudge books, but I feel like it was maybe like her younger books. And then I kind of grew and started reading her older stuff too. I love everything she writes. I also really, really loved the Ramona books, Beverly Cleary, also anything she writes. But the Ramona series was one that I really remember being able to kind of start reading on my own first, and asking for and wanting to read every single thing that had to do with Ramona. There is an author that I talk about constantly, and nobody remembers her, or like one or two people will remember her when I mention her titles, but her name is Barthe de Clements. And she had like kind of a series of books that followed kids from like 4th or 5th grade through high school. And probably one of her favorite or most famous ones was Nothing's Fair in 5th grade. And then she had another follow-up to that was like 6th grade Can Really Kill You. Those were two of my absolute favorites. All of my childhood books are at home in Missouri, unfortunately, but every time I'm home, I will just like grab them and reread them, and they still hold up so much. I think Barth de Clements especially, because I remember reading her stuff and just thinking, oh my gosh, like she's putting these kids through like kind of really tough scenarios and not sugarcoating anything. And it really felt like she had a lot of respect for her reader, which I think is very important to someone who writes for kids and teenagers, is to not, if anyone's going to call your bluff, it's going to be a kid or a teen. And so to just write for them the way that they deserve to be, with a level of respect and honesty that she really put into her books. Yeah, I would say those three were like probably the top authors for me, and the ones that I still like really admire and can still read their work and just love it so much. So, and gosh, I always kind of hate to bring these up because they're problematic now. But I think, you can still love things and you can acknowledge that they're problematic also. But I really loved books by Frances Hodgson Burnett. So like The Secret Garden and A Little Princess were two of my very favorites. And again, those books I don't think actually hold up in terms of they're quite offensive to several different groups. But at the time when that wasn't necessarily being called out, I was able to appreciate them just for the beautiful writing. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that question. I wanted to ask you a question, and I know you touched bases on this a little bit at the beginning. A lot of writers of fiction for young adults say that they write books that they wanted to read when they were teens. What did you want from books that you didn't get as a teen, and how does that inform the books you write now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I've said that on many panels and in conversations. Yeah, well, you'll notice that all the authors I mentioned were white because I did not I know there were Black authors writing then, obviously, and probably some writing books for kids and teens that just somehow didn't make their way to either my library shelves or I just didn't find them in the library, and they definitely did not make it to my own bookshelf. I wanted to see Black kids just living their lives, just being kids, because the books I think that I did read that featured Black kids were typically books that were about, the civil rights struggle or slavery or, living during Jim Crow. And all of those books are very important. And we always, always need those because those are a part of history. And we need to know our history and never forget it. But at the same time, as a kid growing up in the 1980s, it's like, I just kind of want to read about a kid who's like, I don't know, skateboarding and whatever I was doing in the 80s, riding bikes and just having, I don't know, just a normal kid life like that. That's what I want. Like, I guess kids who were going through the same things I was going through, like my parents divorcing and all of that, just knowing what that would look like for a kid who looked like me. So that is really, and sometimes people ask me who I'm writing for. It's me first and foremost, but it's probably me as a younger person, and just really writing the types of books that I loved, but from a perspective of a Black character who is then also dealing with some of the things that I was dealing with. And like I said, kind of giving language to the types of things that I didn't have at the time. So yeah, thank you. I love that question.
I have a question that I also wanted to ask, which was, so when you're writing for young people as an adult, there are things that we remember very vividly about our youth and some things that we maybe forget. What are some truths that you think a lot of adults forget about being a young person, and how do you represent those truths or address them in your work?
Yeah, these questions are great. I think that adults kind of forget that kids have their own opinions and their own minds of their own and thoughts and feelings. That my friend, a wonderful author named Alana K. Arnold, she's got a very broad catalog of books for all ages, but she always says that kids are whole people. And I think that's very true. And I think a lot of adults forget that. Just because you're younger, it doesn't mean that you don't have dreams and desires and hopes and disappointments and all of that, and agency. And so gosh, I just really want like adults to remember that kids are whole people, and they may not have, again, like may not have the same language as we have, but they're forming that, and they're learning, and they're paying attention to the things that are going on around them and the way adults are behaving and reacting and talking to them even. And I think I maybe missed the second part of your question, but did I?
With that, how do you represent that truth that kids are whole people? How do you represent that in your work?
Yeah. So yeah, I think just treating them like that, just, you know, it sort of goes back to when people ask, like, how did you craft such a real character? Or even when people ask, you know, how do you write about a character who isn't like you? And to me, because I'm not 12, you know, but I was at one time, and just to remember, like, characters are people first, and same as, you know, kids are people, and that they are dealing with all of those things. And it just may be a different time in life and a different way to deal with things. But I just think it's all about respect. Even like I was talking about that author earlier, who I felt like really treated her child readers with respect, trusting them to be able to learn these, or to understand these themes that you're writing about. Don't talk down to them. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. Just they're people too. They're just not my age. Yeah.
I wanted to ask the question, if you could turn back time, what is one thing you wish you could tell your younger self? What is the advice that, you know, you can give to anyone that is interested in becoming a writer?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So quick aside, I work for, I copy edit for a magazine for actors. And I always find that like the advice is very like useful for writers too. And this is a question that we ask in this column every week. And I never assumed someone would ask me. So it's like amazing. Yeah, I would just say, gosh, just write specifically, like talking about writing, write the story that's in you. For so long, well, this is something I haven't talked about yet. When I was a kid, all of my books, I wrote a lot, and I had a lot of different books, and all of my books had white characters, because that's who I was around. That was like my whole town, and that's who my friends were. And I did not assume that anyone wanted to read about Black kids, which is really sad to think about now. So I really did not start writing Black characters until I was in my 20s, which I still can't believe. It makes me very sad. But yeah, so I guess my advice would be to just be as true to yourself as you can, even if you think nobody wow, how would I even know that anyone would want to read a book about a Black girl surfer and a goth Black girl in a small beach town in California? That sounds so specific, but I have to tell you, I'm so surprised at how many people have related to this book and have really connected with it. So just be as true to yourself as you can. And just, I think that no matter what, there's always going to be someone who, you know, if we're talking about writing and wanting to get it out to the masses, there's going to be someone who will relate to that and who will be interested. And even if they don't relate to it, it's sort of the doors and windows, mirrors and windows conversation that they say with kids. Dr. Radine Sims Bishop had published a paper about this several years ago, but it's just like kids need mirrors and windows. So they need to see themselves, but they also need to see kids who aren't like them. And I think that, you know, no matter what you're writing, someone on either side is going to find it useful and valuable. So just stay true to yourself.
You are coming up to our last few minutes. We've got about 10 minutes left. One more question before our final question.
Yeah, one more. Let's do one more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have that question, Amanda? Do you want to ask? Or you want me to ask?
You go for this one, and I'll go for the last one.
Okay. So my question for you is, I love this question only because I do it all the time. What is something that you do to de-stress? I know during times like right now, especially with everything that's been happening, you know, what is something that you do every day to take care of yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a very, very timely and useful question. I have a few things, you know, some of them I can't do. Like I love to tap dance. So that's another thing that I've done since I was a little kid. I once told someone, a friend, and they were like, wow, like 7 years old was like really like important for you, because I started writing and I started tap dancing, and those are like still two things I really love. And to be honest, I don't get to tap dance as much as I would like to. And I can't now, and I can't in my apartment, or my downstairs neighbor would hate me. But I think like dancing, even just any kind of dancing, like moving around, getting going. I like to listen to music, and I'm not like a writer who writes to music. So when I listen to music, it's kind of old school. Like I don't have a record player, but it's that same kind of feel. Like I just sit down and listen to music and kind of just like let it take over. I love to cook. That's something that I've like in the last year really gotten into, which is good because I can't go out to restaurants right now. Cooking and baking, I would say, are really good for me. And also kind of like yoga I really like, which is something that I can do at home. So yeah, kind of like getting moving is good. And then also like, yeah, cooking and just kind of like having a task, but it's not writing, but it's still creative, I feel like has been like super helpful and definitely helps me de-stress.
Thank you. And then, so I think this is going to be our last question of the day. And that is, and this is about your forthcoming book, The Voting Booth. Given the research that you did on voting for the voting booth, what's your take on recent events like the dangers and obstacles faced by voters in Georgia as recently as this past Tuesday? Do you have any advice for young and first-time voters who are affected by voter purges, untenable lines, or other forms of voter suppression?
Yeah, I mean, I would never call myself an expert, so take this with a grain of salt. But yeah, you know, it's really sad that my parents, like I mentioned, I think I mentioned they grew up in the South. And so, you know, that's where like there and still are lots of problems with voter suppression and just like intimidation in any way to keep people from voting. So to me, it's always felt like it's sort of like in my blood that it was always going to be an issue to vote, not personally, but just that voting was never going to be just a clear cut, yep, just go drop your ballot and you're done. That's not how it is for a lot of people. And I recognize that even though I may be in an area where that's not the truth, it is for a lot of people. Gosh, I mean, I would just say stay as diligent as possible. I think the most powerful thing is knowledge. So make sure you're staying informed. Don't just take what people say and follow it. Like make sure that you're getting the truth as much as possible. Follow up on things to make sure, like if you hear, you know, you can't vote here or whatever, like make sure that's actually true. Gosh, yeah, I would say that that's my best advice because I don't want to take you on a long-winded thing. It's just stay as informed as you can and also share that knowledge if you can, because, you know, we're more powerful as a group than we are as one person for sure. And if we help each other out, then hopefully we can stop things like from what happened in, you know, Georgia and all of that from happening. I'm nervous about what's coming up, but I really think if we all stay as informed as possible and as just energized and make sure we don't give up and just, you know, let that kind of stuff win, I think we can hopefully be on the way to succeeding. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. And, you know, we're looking forward to the voting booth too.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we're going to be wrapping up. We've got about 7 minutes left in our program.
We could take some of the last, let's see if there's any more questions from our audience. Maybe we can pull something from there. What are some of your favorite books you've read this year? This is from Leah.
Oh gosh, it's terrible. I never remember what I read. What have I read? I'm looking at my bookshelves to see if anything stands out. I read a lot of books that, I read a lot of books early and then I forget that they've been out. So some books I've really enjoyed that I've read recently are Introducing Bree Hutchins by Nicole Melleby. That's another middle grade. I think that's out, I want to say this month. I'm not sure because a lot of publishers push their books because of the pandemic. So it'll be out sometime this year. I also really enjoyed a book called The Black Kids by Christina Hammonds Reed. That will be out from Simon & Schuster in September. And that is a young adult novel it's historical actually, which sounds wild because I was a teenager back then, but it's set during the LA riots. And it's from the perspective of a wealthy Black girl, and just, it's really, really interesting and nuanced. And I think, you know, relevant to sort of, and I called it the riots, but I call them uprisings because it's typically from a community that has felt like they aren't being heard. So yeah, I think it's really relevant to today. That's a great one. I really enjoyed Parachutes by Kelly Yang, which just came out recently. I think the publisher was calling it, oh gosh, Gossip Girl meets Crazy Rich Asians, I think they were calling it. And I would say that's like a perfect comp. It's a really thick, juicy, like YA novel, but really hard hitting, talks about, a lot of things you're dealing with in school, including like sexual assault and things like that. So it's really, really good. An adult book I read recently was Curtis Sittenfeld's Rodham. So it's about Hillary Clinton's, it's like a fictionalized take of Hillary Clinton's life if she had turned down Bill Clinton's marriage proposal. And then they end up running against each other in a presidential election. So it's really good. So I'm sure there's some I'm forgetting, but those are some that I like highly recommend that are recent, that are worth checking out for sure.
Thank you. I wrote them down.
I know, taking notes.
Okay, so I think we really are in the last 5 minutes of our program here. So we want to thank you so much. Many thanks to our guest, Brandy Colbert. We invite everybody watching to check out her ebooks and e-audiobooks from the library online at lapl.org/e-media. And keep an eye out for her next book. Also, The Voting Booth, which is going to be released on July 7th. Please join us every Friday for the Your Author series at 4 p.m. on Facebook and YouTube Live. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at LA Public Library to stay updated with our free programs. And don't forget to sign up for our summer reading program online, the virtual summer reading program. Lastly, we invite you all to join Los Angeles Public Library for another great program tomorrow, Saturday, June 13th at 2 p.m. We'll be co-hosting the 2020 LA Youth Poet Laureate finale and commencement featuring the Los Angeles Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman and the 15 2020 Youth Poet Laureate finalists. Watch online at facebook.com/LA Public Library or youtube.com/user Los Angeles Library. Oh, pardon me, /user / there. Okay.
Yeah, it was so much fun with you, Brandy. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that took the time out to watch our author talk today with Brandy Colbert. And I wish everyone a wonderful weekend. Be safe out there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So yeah, this was so much fun. I loved it.
Yep.
All right, Vinny.